Yeah, the Scientist's Guide to the Revolution. It's quite a big statement. And I guess the first question would be, why would we need that? Well, my contention is that we have a very clear scientific understanding of the world that we live in, about how it's threatened by resource depletion, by climate change, by population, and most of all by the economic system that demands that everybody consumes ever more stuff mindlessly, just for the sake of putting more zeros on unpleasant people's bank accounts. And we have a political system that offers you no way of escaping that situation, no way to escape that paradigm that pretends to offer you choice, but well, I mean, and if you look at the sort of last 40 years, the choice between what are called conservatives and liberals, so that's the Democrats and the Republicans in the US, or the Conservative Party and the Labour Party in the UK, the choice is just minimal, really, in terms of anything meaningful. Yeah, I understand that those that describe themselves as liberals really do care more about women's rights and gay rights and the rights of ethnic minorities, but at the same time they support the same system as the Conservatives. They support the same destructive system as the Conservatives. That just means more and more consumption of resources, of everything in your life being based around ever more, having access to ever more wealth, and that is unsustainable in scientific terms, in the terms of sustainability. We know that consumption, economic growth that drives consumption, or consumption that drives economic growth, equals resource depletion and ever increasing levels of carbon dioxide emissions. And for all liberals might try and tell you that they want to protect the planet with respect to climate change, and they want to bring in all these mitigation strategies such as carbon capture and electric vehicles and all the ideas around net zero, as much as they might even have genuine desire to make a change along those lines, the science tells us it's not possible when you're under a system of constant consumption, of ever expanding consumption against the backdrop of ever increasing populations. We live on a finite planet, and all that stuff somewhere is going to run out. Space will become ever diminishing. People will become ever more crammed together, ever more stressed, ever more scrambling to find ways to keep their head above the water, and that means ever more capitulating for the need to be part of a system that wants you to ever more consume all the time. So yeah, as I was just saying, with respect to politics, in the last 30-40 years we've had this choice, which really amounts to not a choice in terms of what kind of system you live in, and now apparently we have a new politics from the populist right that are apparently, anti-establishment and not part of the elite, who are bullshitting you, right? As most people will know who watch this video, it's just a con. They also believe in fact, they want to take all the brakes off consumption. They want everybody to maximize consumption, to put even more zeros on the end of their bank accounts. That's what they're up to. And of course, they are taking advantage of the fact that the system over the last 40 years has absolutely wrecked people's lives, and people are angry and bewildered and looking for something different, and the only thing that's on offer are some goons who offer them that bullshit. So that's the politics we have. We have an establishment, a faux establishment choice between the Conservatives and the Liberals, which means consumption and ever more being beholden to a world of finance and trying to better yourself and competing with each other, and a false offer of change which really just wants to turbocharge the last 40 years and make it ever more competitive and difficult to get on and to consume as much as possible, and just they'd quite happily destroy the planet. Yeah, they'd quite happily destroy the planet, I think, largely because they think that technology, Elon Musk's or whoever's technology, is going to save us all. B, because they just don't like nature. But C, if they destroy the planet, if they chop down the Amazon, then they wouldn't have to have arguments with people who want to protect the Amazon. So it seems pretty clear to me that they just want to get rid of it all. And yeah, they're offering a very, very disturbing choice, and people are so desperate for something different that they listen to it, and a lot of people are buying it. And if we don't do something to change it, well, the word sustainability, has the ultimate meaning embedded there, because if it's not sustainable, then that means it'll collapse, right? Civilization will collapse. And if we don't, rescue that situation, and going back to what we've had in over the last decades is equally as destructive, and would also lead to the collapse of civilization, not least because it has no solutions for making people's lives better, apart from those at the top. So the Scientist's Guide to the Revolution, well, that's the politics mixed in with some science, that we have a finite planet and we can't continue consuming stuff forever, and therefore the past and the latest political offerings do nothing to solve that problem. So why am I calling this the Scientist's Guide to the Revolution? What motivates me to see that as an apt turn of phrase to tackle what I see as a problem? So, and the problem is that, and I know this, and the data, I know it from personal experience, and the data explains it also. Scientists, on the whole, support the kind of politics that means never-ending consumption and turbocharged economics that's destroying the planet. They are liberals. They support the Democrats and the Labour Party, or whoever it would, the Labour Party in Australia and the Liberal Party in Canada. They're the kind of political parties they support. That's the kind of political philosophy they support. And that politics is destructive, right? The science is clear that you cannot have this kind of politics based on economic growth and never-ending consumption, and yet the majority of scientists support those political parties. Why do they do that? It's very difficult to understand. I've had, during my career, which was, I guess, 10, 15 years, 12, 15 years, I had many conversations with people where I brought this kind of thing up. It's like this kind of, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Tony Blair politics. It's just not sustainable, and it causes misery for the kind of people we should be concerned about. And I, 95, 99% of the time, I just got bewildered looks from colleagues who would, even though I was backing up what I said with science, often kind of infer that I was crazy, right? So, yeah, we're offered this conservatism or this horrible right-wing populism or liberalism. And 60% of scientists, I would say, are liberals, maybe 20% are socialists, and the other 20% are probably conservative or libertarian. So there's only, I would say, 20% of academics who support the kind of politics that can ever rescue the planet and make it sustainable. So, I'd like to sort of outline from my own experience an anecdote that I think best explains what it is that describes the attitudes of academics in general into supporting that kind of middle of the road neoliberal centrist politics that is equally as destructive as conservatism and right-wing populism. So when I was in science, there was a guy who came to visit our lab. He was trying to work out, he had some money and he wanted to know whether he might collaborate with us. So he was a guest at the lab for a couple of days. And the one evening he was there, we went out for a meal. There was me, my boss, and one other guy who was my equal. And these two guys from my lab, my boss and this other postdoc, we'd had so many conversations where I'd said, look, this politics, they're both Barack Obama devotees, and they're both American, saying, this kind of politics, it's ecologically destructive. And they'd just look at me like I was mad. And I was having this conversation over dinner. I brought it up. I was talking about, the planet's not sustainable. And all three of them, the two guys from my lab and this other guy who was visiting from Australia, were like going, no, this is just like, this is the reality. This is like, real politic. This is the way it is. And after a few minutes, the guy from Australia who was visiting, he just kind of went, I'm just going to stop this conversation now. I want to tell you, if I was at home with my mates in the pub, what you're saying, I'd be saying exactly the same. I'd be telling them civilization is going to collapse. And the reason I've been pretending to disagree with you is because I don't want to make myself look like a bit of a weirdo in front of people who I might work with in the future. So he's afraid. Now these arguments about the planet not being sustainable under the terms of economic growth and ever exacerbating consumption, these are backed up by hardcore scientific papers, understanding. But he was afraid to articulate his scientific understanding for fear of outing himself as a bit of a maverick and as a bit of a nutter in front of fellow scientists. And that, to me, is the most incredibly poignant story reflecting the culture of science at the moment. That if you actually stand up and say, this is crazy, these systems are crazy, this politics is crazy, and I mean, liberal politics who are supposed to be the good guys, If you say no, we can't have this, this is going to destroy the planet, and the science backs that up, if you say that in a scientific arena, people will denounce you as being a bit weird and a bit crazy. So the final point there is that obviously the evidence that a global economy built on ever increasing economic growth is unsustainable is based on scientific understanding. But scientists, for the most part, cannot integrate that with their politics, or don't integrate that with their politics, out of a fear, I think, of protecting their career, and not wanting to appear like a whack job in front of their people who employ them, and who might, if you start saying we can't have economic growth, then that doesn't really fit in with the university's business model, which is, never-ending growth, and you're just challenging the orthodoxy of society. And the people in the management positions in universities don't want to hear that. So there's a culture that's evolved where people kind of just steer clear. They're very happy to say, I'm very concerned about climate change, but the actual drivers of climate change, the economics of climate change, they won't bring it up. Now, obviously, there are scientists who study it and have brought our attention to the fact that it is a destructive economics. They're there in academia. Not everyone's, this kind of toeing the line, kind of afraid to speak the truth, afraid to speak truth to power, kind of solely concerned about their career. Then not everyone's like that, but the ones who are driving the understanding, who have given us the scientific understanding that the planet's unsustainable, they're a minority, and they're ridden roughshod over by the majority of playing it safe, kind of career-driven people that make up the majority of society and get of academia and science, and get the best jobs because they say the right things and they do the right things, and they say, yeah, I love Barack Obama, I'm very concerned about climate change, but any kind of economic revolution, that's crazy. They're the kind of people who get the jobs. That makes up, the majority of science. And that's why science needs a revolution. Because it just needs to listen to itself. Science needs to listen to the science. Not about whether you're trying to understand the evolution of biodiversity on the planet. Not about whether you're trying to, whatever science, the genetics of disease or whatever it is, that's all, that's by the by. That's fine. It's that niche of science about sustainability that scientists on the whole need to listen to. And that's why science needs a revolution. Because science, if anyone, can drag society out of the mess it's in, I believe it would be scientists. Because if they stop backing the Barack Obamas and Joe Bidens of this world and said your politics doesn't line up with our scientific understanding of sustainability, then those politicians would lose their credibility. And that's why it's really important that scientists wake up to that. And nobody wants to see a revolution with heads on spikes and guillotines. It has to be done in a humane way. But make no doubts about it, in the same way that there was an industrial revolution, society needs a revolution, otherwise it will collapse. And science needs to be at the heart of that change. The Scientist's Guide to the Revolution, that's the message, I hope.